Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel and one of the most murderous war criminals of our age, has threatened, bluntly speaking, to wipe Lebanon from the face of the earth and face a genocidal war being prosecuted against it by the State of Israel. Let's hear from an address made by Netanyahu, purportedly to the people of Lebanon this week.
Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel also has a right to win, and Israel will win. We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself, and Nasrallah's replacement, and the replacement of his replacement. Today, Hezbollah is weaker than it's been for many, many years. Now you, the Lebanese people, you stand at a significant crossroads. It is your choice. You can now take back your country. You can return it to a path of peace and prosperity. If you don't, Hezbollah will continue to try to fight Israel from densely populated areas at your expense. It doesn't care if Lebanon is dragged into a wider war. Christians, Druze, Muslims, Sunnis, and Shiites, all of you are suffering because of Hezbollah's futile war against Israel. Today I ask every mother and every father in Lebanon a simple question. Is it worth it? Because it doesn't have to be that way. I know you want a better future for your children. So I'm speaking to all of you today. There is a better way for your children, for your cities, for your villages, for your country. You deserve to restore Lebanon to its days of tranquility. You deserve a Lebanon that is different. One country, one flag, one people. Don't let these terrorists destroy your future any more than they've already done. Stand up and take your country back. You have an opportunity that hasn't existed in decades. An opportunity to take care of the future of your children and grandchildren. You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza.
Okay, a few things. Netanyahu, of course, erases the decades of atrocities committed by the Israeli state in Lebanon, like the 1982 invasion, in which Israel committed so many atrocities that the US right-wing Republican President Ronald Reagan rang the then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to protest against what Reagan called a Holocaust. You then had the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, in which up to 3,500 civilians, largely Palestinian and Lebanese Shia, were massacred by Israel's allies, the Phalanges, which was coordinating with the Israeli Defense Forces. The atrocities committed were beyond hellish, and the then Defense Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, was forced to resign in disgrace. He was found responsible for that massacre by an Israeli commission, but later became Prime Minister. Now, in the last year, who has been responsible for the vast majority of cross-border attacks, Israel or Hezbollah? Well, let's just listen to the BBC in late July.
There's been over 7,000 such attacks between October and early July. That's according to data gathered by the conflict monitoring group ACLED and analysed by the BBC. The vast majority of these cross-border attacks were carried out by the Israeli military with a ratio of about 5-1.
Even the BBC. But the key sentence in Netanyahu's address, which was specifically highlighted by his official Twitter account, was as follows: "You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza." That is a very clear and straightforward threat. What he's saying in this address is, we will destroy you unless you have a civil war. You either yourselves go to war with Hezbollah, and bear in mind 93% of Lebanon's Shia population have a positive view of Hezbollah. That's not to express any of my own sympathies of any sort for Hezbollah. It's to point out they have mass support amongst the Shia population and indeed are part of the ruling coalition government in Lebanon. So this would be not just a civil war, but a vicious, sectarian civil war. He's saying unless you do this, Israel will unleash the genocidal fury it has already unleashed against Gaza, against Lebanon, with credible estimates, for example, put forward by public health experts in The Lancet, suggesting that 1 in every 13 Palestinians in Gaza could already have been killed by Israel's year-long genocidal onslaught. Most civilian infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged, so Gaza is a different colour and texture when looked at from space. From the mass, violent, repeated displacements of almost the entire population to a deliberate siege of the essentials of life, which has caused famine. From mass, brutal incarceration to torture and rape. From the injuring and maiming of 100,000 Palestinians to the destruction of Gaza's healthcare system. We could go on. one of the most abominable crimes of our age, and that's what Israel explicitly says it wishes to replicate in Lebanon. Now, let's talk about what's already happened to Lebanon. But first, I'm going to subject you, I'm afraid, to Matthew Miller, the US State Department spokesperson.
So you said earlier that Israel has a right to attack Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. I wanted to ask if you had seen the Israeli Prime Minister's video that he put out in English to the people of Lebanon last night. He had a couple lines in there. He said, "You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. I say to you, the people of Lebanon, free your country from Hezbollah so that this war can end." That seems like a blanket threat against the civilian population. Is that terrorism?
So, first of all, let me say we cannot and must not see the situation in Lebanon turn into anything like the situation in Gaza. That would, of course, not be acceptable. And ultimately, it is as I said in response to an earlier question, it is up to the Lebanese people, not anybody else, to decide on who their government is. I said in response to another question, no country in the region should dictate to the Lebanese people who their leaders are. Not Israel, not the United States, not any of the other countries in the region, and that should continue.
But Israel is dictating
to
that.
be the case. No, they're conducting operations going after a terrorist organization. That's a different thing than dictating what the civilian government should be. That's a question for the Lebanese people to decide. So,
but if they decide against Israel's wishes, Israel is threatening Gaza-like annihilation of the people of Lebanon.
And I'm making very clear that there should be no kind of military action in Lebanon that looks anything like Gaza and leaves a result anything like Gaza.
Okay, first thing here. He says we can't and mustn't see the situation in Lebanon turn into anything like the situation in Gaza. That would, of course, not be acceptable. Excuse me, what does he mean there? Why, of course, would it not be acceptable if Israel did that in Lebanon, Matthew? Are you saying that because what Israel has done in Gaza, armed and facilitated every step of the way by your administration, that's been unacceptable? And if so, in what way? Or are you saying that it was acceptable to do that to Gaza but not Lebanon? And why are they different? Help me out here, Matthew, please. You're always so eloquent in your answers. Indeed, let's listen to Nadia Bilbassi Charters, Washington Bureau Chief for Al Arabiya, asked the following to the White House spokesperson, Karine Jeanpierre.
And one last question. In 2 weeks, there is already 8 hospitals in Lebanon are out of service. There is thousands of people being killed. There is 1 million forced to flee their homes. And the Israelis has calling for more troops. So how can this not be a scenario in Gaza that we have seen it unfolding? And second isn't that a mission creep? How do you agree with the Israelis on the outcome of the war if Netanyahu said we're going to continue regardless of what the White House more or less is saying, as long as we are not achieving our aims in Lebanon?
Say what I said moments ago. We do not want to see Gaza, what happened in Gaza happen in Lebanon. That's what I said, and that is something that we do not want to see. And as we've said, Israel does have the right to defend itself, to go after their security threats that they see. But one civilian casualty is too many, and we've been very clear about that. Israel must take every feasible precaution to prevent civilian harm.
Spot on question, diabolical answer. Thousands have indeed already been killed by the Israeli state in Lebanon. In Lebanon, the Israeli state are bombing rescue workers. Listen to Alex Crawford, Sky News, one of the best broadcast journalists, incidentally, on this, in Lebanon.
Emergency workers, civil defence workers, Red Cross workers, all telling us that they feel they are now the targets of Israeli strikes. One of this emergency crew, civil defence team, said one team went to rescue some people who'd been hurt in a bomb strike. They then got hit. A second civil defence team went to help them. They got hit. The Red Cross went to help that second team which got hit, and they also got hit. A lot of stories about how the emergency workers themselves now feel under target.
Early this week, Lebanese authorities reported Israel had killed 50 health workers in 3 days. The mass slaughter of medical staff should be seen as utterly shocking, indicative of a truly monstrous attacker. But Israel normalised it in Gaza, and now it has no cut through at all. This is an example, and I will keep returning to this theme, partly because I'm writing a book on it, but I'm writing a book on it because it's what I think, in the fall of the West. Just an example of moral collapse. The world can see all this. It can see who's facilitating it. Israel is essentially a Western state. The consequences will be felt for generations, I can assure you of that. Here's the village of Yaroun in Lebanon comparing what it looks like now after the Israeli onslaught and what it looked like before. Well, yeah, that does indeed look like Gaza now, doesn't it? The same genocidal destruction. The US facilitated the genocidal onslaught in Gaza with pathetic occasional hand-wringing and now is set to do exactly the same in Lebanon. And it is up to us to make sure they don't get away with that. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide media at patreon.com/4. Listen to the podcast. Hit like and subscribe. Speaking a bit.